A second-grade teacher is allegedly caught with a gun at school within reach of her young students. We're examining the case and potential consequences with Chad Ayers, former sheriff's deputy, former SWAT, and founder of Proactive Response Group. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, everybody, this is a Law&Crime legal alert. Google Incognito tracked users' browsing data without their knowledge. Yep, well, Mass Tort Alliance, one of our legal sponsors, is helping users file for compensation due to Google misleading the privacy of their incognito browser. So if you've used Google Incognito anytime since 2016, you can start your claim in less than 10 questions at incognitoclaims.com/sidebar. All right, let's talk about 40-year-old Marissa Meyer. Now, she was acting as a substitute teacher in a second-grade classroom at Mary Beck Elementary in Elkhart, Indiana on Monday. And this is when the school resource officer was alerted that Meyer had a gun in her backpack. She was arrested, charged with possession of a firearm on school property. It's a level 6 felony, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, police say Meyer doesn't have any criminal history. We got our hands on the affidavit in support of a warrantless arrest, and I'm going to talk about it more. But who better to talk about this than somebody we've had here on Sidebar repeatedly, somebody, our fan favorite, somebody who I actually haven't had the chance to meet in person, but he's with us today, former sheriff's deputy, former SWAT, founder of Proactive Response Group, Chad Ayers. Chad is in studio with us. Chad, good to see you.
Jesse, it is great to be here in the city and to get to hang out with you guys for a little bit.
This is a big moment for you.
This is a long time coming.
Yeah.
Right?
Is it the studio that is a bigger thing for you, or the fact that you get to hang out with all of us here?
I think it's a little mixture of both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're going to change this studio. So don't get, people, we get a lot of criticism online about our studio, but what do you think? It's not terrible.
It's not bad at all.
Yeah,
I mean, you know how media, social media, they're going to nitpick anything.
I know. But it's okay. It's okay. Chad, I got you here. I'm so happy to have you here. So, first, let me start off. In most jurisdictions, schools are gun-free zones, right? And have you ever seen, and we'll get into it more, have you ever seen a case like this where a teacher brings a gun to school?
Just 2 weeks ago in my hometown in Greenville, South Carolina. We had a teacher that was arrested. In fact, it was a school that had an active shooter event 2 years ago. And the teacher kind of was showing it off a little bit, thinking he had good friends. It's almost identical, and he was arrested 2 weeks ago in Greenville, South Carolina.
What was the rationale?
He didn't want to explain why he had the gun in his backpack.
Wow.
I think a lot of times, though, it truly is an honest mistake.
Let's talk about that, because now we're going to get back into this story. So I want to dive into this affidavit. Chad's going to be here to break it down with me. So the Elkhart County corporal, who was working as a school resource officer, writes, quote, I was contacted by Jamie Snyder, the director of safety and security for Elkhart Community Schools, in reference to a possible teacher being in possession of a handgun at Mary Beck Elementary School. At this time, I went to the school where Snyder met me a short time later. We met with the assistant principal, Brandon Kavanaugh, who advised the school librarian, Sarah Avery, had come to him and reported that Meyer had told her that she was in possession of a gun at school today. So you have these several players here, the SRO, the assistant principal, the director of safety, the librarian who learned Meyer had a gun. That seems like a lot of people who were involved in this and kind of like this chain of command.
Right. Which is so interesting, talking about the librarian. If you read in a little bit more to this case, they were good friends.
Yeah.
And she basically came to her and said, hey, look, I left my gun in my backpack. What should I do? And first of all, I don't know why you would say that to someone. I think she was probably in panic mode. But obviously, in a situation like this, a firearm on school grounds, there's a lot of people that are going to be involved, from administration to the school resource officer to the authorities that school resource officer probably works under. And
I will tell you, and to be clear, no one got hurt. There's no one who was shot, no one who was injured. But the idea of a gun on school property, even if it was a mistake, and we'll get into it a little bit more, the danger of having a weapon like that near children, I'm sure in your career and your experience, that just can lead to disastrous consequences.
Well, and look, I'm probably going to get a little bit of pushback on what I'm about to say, but the fact is this. Obviously, what I do now, after getting out of law enforcement and now teaching active shooter response to school districts across the country, there's a big debate out here about arming teachers, right?
Yep.
I've always been against that, and this is why. And it's nothing against someone's Second Amendment rights. The fact of the matter is, teachers are there to teach. Our school resource officers are there to protect the students and make sure things go safe. imagine, and it's this type of situation exactly. Thank God nothing happened. But imagine being a first grade teacher. You have your firearm that you're allowed to carry as a teacher, and you walk into a classroom, a student's throwing up. You set your bag down to go help them, and then another first grader fumbles through your bag and gets their hands on it. There's so much that could potentially happen in a situation like that.
The counter argument is, of course, with an active shooter, and you have one or two school resource officers, they won't be able to respond in time. So you have teachers who are there who might be able to save, maybe act quickly and save lives. But it's a tough situation, to say the least. Let me go a little bit more into this. So we have the SRO, the assistant principal, the safety director. They all go down to the classroom where the second graders are working on schoolwork. And the affidavit says, quote, Snyder informed Meyer why we were there and asked her if she was in possession of a gun. Meyer stated that she was, and it was in her backpack, that she was in the classroom, so she wasn't like hiding it or anything like that. Meyer told Snyder where it was located. Snyder went, retrieved the backpack that was in teal in color with multiple compartments and had several of the compartments unzipped. The bag was sitting on a chair by the teacher's desk in a place where any of the students in the room could have gained access to the gun that was later found inside. So they go through the bag, and there's a .22 caliber Phoenix Arms handgun in there. And the affidavit states, quote, the handgun was unloaded, but the magazine for the gun was located in the backpack and contained 8 live rounds of .22 LR. Also located in the backpack was an empty gun holster that, when located, Meyer made the comment that the gun must have fallen out. So again, it seems to me they're saying that, or at least Meyer's saying, that the gun fell out of the holster, but it might not have been actively in a condition where it could have fired, but it could have easily been loaded. I mean, there were live rounds in there, and that's a little concerning.
Well, 100%. I mean, like we said, we're in a school. You know, depending on the type of holster that you have, yes, I can understand where it could fall out, throwing it in your backpack. But again, we are in an elementary school where kids are curious.
Yeah.
Right. And you go fumbling around and you get your hands on it. And again, do I think a first grader has the wherewithal to figure out how to insert a magazine, charge around? No, but it's the fact of the matter is, just like law enforcement, teacher, you've got to be held to a higher standard.
Well, how are you familiar with that weapon? How difficult is it to load it?
I mean, obviously, you're going to have to insert the magazine. You have to have the grip strength to charge around, put around from the magazine into what's called, the chamber of the gun. So it is going to take a little bit of strength. I always laugh. My wife and I go target shooting, and even her as a grown adult has trouble at times racking the slide back to get around in the chamber.
I bet she's a better shot, though.
All females are better shots than men for some reason. But again, it would be very difficult, I believe, for an elementary school kid to put that gun into battery.
That's one of the things that struck me, and I was happy to have you here, is how, whether it's a school resource officer or an officer with the police department, how do they approach a situation where there's an active weapon? That's got to be a very sensitive situation. You have to be very careful how you approach it. What do you do?
Well, one, you don't want to cause a lot of discourse in the room, but I want to get my hands on that bag. And the great part is, the teacher had already told the librarian that it was in her backpack, so they knew where it was. So obviously, if I'm that school resource officer, I'm not going to make a big show. I'm going to be as discreet as possible, but I'm going to go with an administrator in there, and I'm going straight to get my hands on the backpack. Again, that's just to protect myself, to protect everyone else in the room, until we fully know the story of why is this gun in the backpack.
And how do you retrieve it? I know that's kind of a specific question, but how do you handle it in a way to make sure everything's okay and it doesn't go off? Or how do you approach that?
Carefully.
Yeah.
Because obviously they didn't know that the gun was not loaded, that the magazine wasn't in there or went in the chamber. And look, very easily with, car keys, things in backpacks that could get inside the trigger guard of that firearm. If it was loaded and it wasn't in a holster, it very well could have gone off.
Right.
So for me, I'm going to go in there and just discreetly open it up. If I see it and I can tell, okay, this thing's not loaded, I can safely move the backpack. The last thing I want to do is do that in front of the kids. Maybe you go in there and, have a teacher down the hallway pull those kids into their classroom. Right. So you're not drawing attention. The last thing we want to do is freak a bunch of elementary school kids out that their substitute teacher has a pistol in the classroom.
You talked about it before, but let's talk about why she even had this weapon in her backpack in the first place if she knew she was going to substitute teach that day. Well, the affidavit states, quote, Meyer also stated to Snyder that the reason the gun was in the bag was because she lost the key fob to her vehicle in South Bend yesterday and had to leave her vehicle there. Meyer stated that she removed the gun from the vehicle, forgot it was in the backpack until she arrived at the school. The officer checked, and Meyer does have a valid handgun permit, and the gun is registered. So, Chad, it seems like could have been a simple mistake, but what could she have done differently?
I just did this yesterday flying up here to New York, right?
Yep.
Every time I get to the airport, I double and triple check my backpack. Obviously, as a former law enforcement officer, and being able to carry a firearm, I keep a firearm on me, at home most of the time. But I never put my firearm in my travel backpack for that reason. How many people, high-profile people, politicians have been caught going through airports, and it's a mistake. But you know what? It doesn't matter. They are treated the same way, mistake or not. You have to have the wherewithal, and you have to, be disciplined enough to check your stuff before you come in there. Again, I think this was honestly a true mistake that happened, and now she's going to pay the consequence for it.
But in your experience, have you arrested somebody or been part of the arrest of somebody who mistakenly had a weapon and they weren't facing charges? They said, listen, we understand this was an oversight. This was a mistake.
The only time I've seen this really happen like this is in an airport setting where we had a deputy that was going to a class and totally forgot that his gun was in the backpack. And again, it gets the sheriff involved. It gets the prosecutor involved. But keep in mind, this isn't like, an internal investigation or an internal investigation. You've got TSA, you've got, FAA, all these other federal agencies. It's not like you can play the good old boy system at the airport and say, hey, I was a cop. Look, it just doesn't work that way.
And this is a school, not an airport, but she faces a level 6 felony charge, which I believe carries 6 months to 2.5 years in prison. I got to imagine that if she were to plead guilty to this, I don't even know if she would get prison time. No. I feel like it would be probation.
I think
would her license get revoked or something like that?
I think that the concealed carry permit's probably going to get revoked. I think she's going to pay a fine, probably do some type of pretrial intervention, to get it off, of her record. I can see something like this happen. This lady, listen, they're not throwing this lady in prison for this. The investigators that are investigating this are going to do their due diligence and looking at all the facts of this case and realize this is a mistake.
Well, the SRO included statements from the school staff that were involved, including the librarian, as Chad said, that I went down to Mrs. Gamble's classroom where Mrs. Meyer was substituting. I went to the classroom because Mrs. Meyer and I have become friends and enjoy saying hi and checking in on each other. While in the classroom, Miss Meyer shared with me that she is stressed because she has family in town. Her husband lost the key to her car. Mrs. Meyer proceeded to tell me that due to not having the key to her car, she cleaned her car out, which is when she placed the gun in her backpack. Mrs. Meyer said she forgot that it was in her backpack, now currently in her backpack in the classroom. I said my usual goodbye to Mrs. Meyer, went back to the library to process and decide what I should do with this information. So the librarian is seemingly trying to figure out who she should report this to. Eventually, she's able to get in touch with Kavanaugh, the assistant principal, and he kind of takes it over from there. So she's kind of in a tough spot here because Meyer is apparently her friend. She's reporting having this gun. She did the right thing, Chad, but sometimes, or you tell me I think she did the right thing, but sometimes people in that position wouldn't report, right? Family members, friends, they wouldn't be in that position to essentially, and I don't know what the best word is, but report on, rat on, whatever you want to say on somebody.
Jesse, you're trying to say snitch.
Well, I mean, she did the right thing.
But she 100%. Look, that's an integrity issue.
Yeah.
Right? If she was to bury that and God forbid something did happen like we just talked about before, you think this librarian wants to live with that the rest of her life? Absolutely not. I wish the lady had never even told the librarian. In a sense, she put her in a terrible situation. Thank God nothing happened, but she backed her into her corner. But the librarian 100% did the right thing. Yeah. She stuck to her guns, and she had the integrity to report it. And unfortunately, not sure where this friendship's going to go from there.
Well,
but hopefully she can understand that. Hey, look, you came to me and told me that you had this gun in your backpack. You put me in a crappy situation.
She really did. I got to give her credit for reporting on this. Meyer was released on a $5,000 bond. She has a hearing scheduled for next week. We kind of talked a little bit about where you see this going. And one of the things that struck me as well is how important it is to have a school resource officer to respond quickly to that. But also, we talked about at the very beginning, this level of, one person spoke to the next person. They had a protocol in place. How important is it for schools to be prepared for this and for school resource officers to be prepared for this?
So school resource officers go through some additional training on their own.
Yeah.
Right? Aside from the police academy and what you get in field training, going into a school that's a different dynamic of laws and legality on what you can do, searching students, searching backpacks. So obviously, but it's all about working together. We've talked about this a lot, all right? Multiple agencies working together, for the common good and for the common goal. But I think the school resource officer is a great layer of defense, in situations, not just on active shooter events or violence, but, mediators between teachers. Look, we've had teachers that have shown up intoxicated to schools before. And there's a lot that is put on school resource officers. I think, honestly, back in the day, school resource officers are where people went to retire. Basically, that's not the case anymore. You can't have 40 years in, being 70 years old and assigned to the school, right? And I'm not talking about age or anything like that. It's just you need people that are able to respond. Some of these elementary schools now are 2 and 3 floors high. It's not just a single story school. So you actually need more of the cream of the crop, young, athletic deputies that are in there that can do their job, respond in a critical incident, but be able to think on this at the same time.
I wish that wasn't the case. I wish we didn't have to think like that, but unfortunately we do. The good news about this story is no one was hurt. No one was harmed. No gun went off. Just a crazy situation. And, we'll see if it seems more of like a lesson that needs to be learned than any kind of penalty, to say the least. But Chad Ayers, good seeing you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. I'll see you soon.
Awesome. And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.